Today, we're looking at maybe the most frustrating part of learning a language. It's that C1 plateau.
Exactly. It's that point where you're advanced, you can function, you can hold complex conversations, but you're not masterful. That final leap to C2, to true effortless fluency, it just feels completely out of reach. The old methods, the textbook stuff, they just stop working.
Yeah, the returns just diminish so dramatically. And the material we're analyzing today really gets to the heart of how to break through it. The central question is, will conquering that plateau demand a super formal, self-designed personal learning system, almost like an architectural blueprint? Or is that kind of rigid engineering actually limiting? Is true mastery something you find more organically through, deep cultural immersion?
And I'll be arguing for the system. I believe that only a meticulously designed, formalized structure, what the source material calls the blueprint and the 4 pillars, can deliver those tiny, painstaking gains you need at this level. You have to become a language architect, or you risk getting stuck for good.
And I'm coming at this from a different angle. I think while all those elements are useful, the overemphasis on engineering fluency risks turning it into an intellectual project. And I believe true mastery comes from living inside the language. It's cultural, it's spontaneous, and it's something that can't really be captured in a checklist.
Okay, so let's start with the need for structure. For the advanced learner, this methodological shift is, in my view, non-negotiable. To get from C1 to C2, you have to adopt an architectural vision. It all begins with the blueprint. And the foundation of that is what the material calls a brutally honest self-assessment, a C1 audit. You have to identify exactly what you can't do effortlessly. And then, crucially, you have to define a very specific North Star goal.
Okay.
Are you trying to lead technical meetings, publish creative work? It can't just be get better at English. That specificity is what focuses your efforts. We saw this with Javier, the software architect in the material. His goal wasn't just better English. It was to lead a technical discussion with the same authority and rhetorical flair I have in Spanish. Now that requires a structured plan. General conversation practice just won't cut it.
I agree that specificity gives you direction, and that's essential. But I would frame the whole journey a little differently. C2 is about operating effectively within a cultural context. So for me, the most important part of this whole system is actually the final step. Pillar 4, cultural integration. I'd argue it has to take precedence over all the systematic engineering because the skills you need at that top level. Think about complex humor, sarcasm, irony, what the experts call pragmatics. You can't just schedule drills for that stuff. For anyone unfamiliar, pragmatics are the unwritten rules of social interaction, the subtle cues, how to make small talk, what's really being said under the surface. You can't time block learning sarcasm on a Tuesday morning. It requires constant, authentic, real-world exposure. Like Kenji did in the material, diving into Reddit communities not just to read, but to see how graduate students actually debated. The system, for me, should be about creating a captivating environment, not a restrictive schedule.
But even that kind of integration benefits from structure. If you just sit around waiting for pragmatics to, spontaneously appear, you could be waiting forever. You have to actively seek them out. And this brings us to our first major point of contention: the effectiveness of structured precision engineering versus just relying on contextual absorption.
Right.
And I will staunchly defend Pillar 3 here. The mastery of micro details is what separates a fluent C1 speaker from a truly masterful C2 user. And this is achieved through what's called precision engineering. Let's be specific. It means focusing on things like collocations, knowing you make a decision but do business, and very critically, understanding register.
Okay, register.
Knowing when to use formal language versus informal. For a C1 learner, swapping a formal verb like commence for a casual phrase like kick off in a high-stakes meeting, that's a dead giveaway. Fixing those small, repetitive failures is what stops you from feeling like an imposter. And that kind of refinement requires systematic, deliberate practice, like keeping a targeted collocation journal. You can't just hope to absorb it through osmosis.
I agree, precision is absolutely vital. I just believe that true mastery of things like register and collocations requires understanding the context that governs them. You can memorize 100 collocations, but if you don't grasp the social situations where they're appropriate, you'll still sound, well, unnatural. Or worse, you'll make a cultural mistake. The problem with mechanical drilling is it disconnects the language from its human use. We saw this with Priya, the project manager in Canada. She didn't just study lists of polite phrases. She did a deep dive into Canadian workplace etiquette. She learned the why behind the language, why suggestions are phrased as questions, why they use passive voice for criticism. To really master register, you have to be immersed. You have to observe. Precision comes through that messy, spontaneous application, not just from mechanical drills.
I see the point, but I'm not convinced because that line of reasoning, I think, it underestimates the stubborn nature of ingrained bad habits, what we call fossilized errors. These are mistakes you've been making for years, and now they are just hardwired into your brain.
Okay.
And that brings us to our second contention, the absolutely critical, systematic role of active production and the self-correction feedback loop. The blueprint is very clear here. You have to forge your own voice, and you must eliminate these fossilized errors. The only reliable way to do that is through a deliberate, iterative, even mechanical process. I'm talking about structured self-talk. You record yourself speaking, you listen back, you analyze every hesitation, every flaw and prosody, and then you re-record until it's perfect. It's a non-negotiable component to break the cycle.
Okay, active production is necessary. I'm with you there. You can't just passively listen your way to C2. But I really question the efficiency and, honestly, the psychological wisdom of relying so heavily on intense self-correction. If the goal is C2 spontaneity, well, spending hours analyzing every single utterance you make, recording yourself over and over, doesn't that risk slowing you down, making you more self-conscious?
It builds precision.
But at what cost? I mean, if the C1 audit is so brutally honest, won't this constant self-analysis just completely demoralize you and make you quit? I think for an advanced learner, it's often more efficient to outsource that feedback. Investing in a C1 plus coach or even just rigorous, honest, peer feedback is better for spotting the really subtle stuff, timing, conversational prosody, things you're usually blind to yourself. You need external eyes and ears for those sophisticated flaws.
But external feedback is passive until you internalize it. A coach can point out an error 5 times, but the system, the repeated self-talk and re-recording, is what hardwires the correction into your brain. The structure is the bridge from knowledge to mastery. Which brings us to our final contention, system resilience versus the need for flexibility. I defend the structure in the maintenance phase, the absolute need for time blocking and habit stacking.
Ah, the schedule.
Yes. Relying on fleeting motivation is where most C1 learners fail. The system has to be built on a foundation of habits. Even on a busy day, having a minimum viable dose, just 15 minutes of advanced shadowing or reviewing your collocation journal, that ensures you keep your momentum. It means that when inspiration fails, discipline prevails.
On a strict schedule, Monday, 7:30 to 8 a.m. shadowing practice. That's exactly what leads to burnout. It completely ignores the human element. Fluency at this level requires the brain to be captivated, not confined.
But it keeps you on track.
Does it? I think the system should prioritize flexibility. True immersion is often opportunistic. Think about Kenji again. His deep dive into Reddit wasn't in his schedule. He was driven by genuine curiosity. If your system says you have to do your drills when a fascinating conversation or an amazing piece of content pops up, you miss the organic moments where the language really sticks. The architecture should be a scaffold, sure, but you have to be able to vary the routine, to follow your passions. That's what keeps the brain engaged.
But without that structure, those fleeting moments aren't enough to build consistent progress across all 4 pillars. You might absorb some great content, but without a dedicated system for both input and output, the errors will persist. Discipline is the safety net.
I think we can agree consistency is key, but I'd argue that true immersion, creating a bespoke, high-quality English bubble, provides that consistency by captivating the brain. If you prioritize genuine cultural context and communicative flow, the detailed mechanics often follow, and they're accelerated by that external feedback we talked about.
So, to summarize my position, the path from C1 to true mastery requires an intentional, architectural vision. Success hinges on the precision and sustainability that only a structured system can offer. It defines your North Star, it maps the terrain with a C1 audit, and it ensures meticulous refinement.
That discipline is what prevents the backsliding that defines the C1 plateau.
And my conclusion remains that while organization is valuable for direction, the ultimate goal isn't a perfect, rigid system. It's to reach the point where you stop using English and start living in it. And that transition is fundamentally cultural and psychological. It requires a willingness to prioritize authentic, messy application and flexible curiosity over mechanical drills. It's about grasping cultural context for true mastery.
The journey to C2, then, is really about finding that optimal tension point between the discipline structure you need for precision and the organic discovery required for genuine cultural fluency.
Precisely. The listener has to consider their own North Star and figure out the right ratio of architectural rigor versus cultural fluidity for their own journey. There's clearly more to explore here.